What's up, YouTube, and welcome in, Bears fans. Thank you so much for joining me on the number 3 episode of The Lindemann Show. I am your host, Cody Lindemann. I am so glad you have joined me today. Please make sure to comment and subscribe or leave a like. That is the easiest and best way to support me here on the channel. All it takes is a click or tap in your iPhone screen or any phone screen you have, and leaving a like is very supportive to the show, so always appreciate that. If you're new here, thank you for joining me. Glad to have you as a part of the community, and we are gonna hop into the show without further ado. In the first half of the show, we're going to talk about Week 18 playoff scenarios, what exactly that entitles, and maybe how Week 18 games can impact the Bears. And in the second half of the show, we're going to talk about the Chicago Bears coaching search, as hopefully it is on in full swing at Halas Hall, but talk about it a little bit more here on the show as we focused more on Ryan Poles. In the past couple weeks, he will definitely come up in the second half of the show, but talk a little bit more about coaching here moving forward. But as I said here, for the first half of the show, we're going to hop into the Week 18 playoff scenarios. We're not going to focus on winning divisions so much or seeding, but more focus on who can get in, how they can get in. And all this is according to ESPN. I'm going to start off in the AFC and then move over to the NFC. So in the AFC, the Kansas City Chiefs have clinched the number 1 seed. Buffalo Bills got the number 2 seed. Steelers, Ravens, Texans, and Chargers have all claimed a spot in the playoffs, seeding yet to be determined, and there is one spot available, 3 teams competing to get into that one last spot in the AFC. First of all, the Cincinnati Bengals at 8-8 are going to try to clinch that spot. They definitely have the toughest road to get in. They need a win against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Saturday night. Then they have to have Denver lose to the Kansas City Chiefs, which seems very possible, although we don't know if Kansas City will be resting their starters with the number 1 seed already clinched, so that is yet to be determined. And Miami loss or tie, plus that Denver loss and a win by the Cincinnati Bengals will get them into the playoffs in the AFC. Now, the Denver Broncos at 9-7 most definitely have the easiest path into the playoffs. All they have to do in their game against the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday afternoon is win or tie, or they can also get in with a Cincinnati loss or tie at Pittsburgh and a Miami loss or tie at the New York Jets. So 2 different ways for the Broncos to get in. And then the Dolphins also are competing for that last spot in the AFC. Their path to get in, they need a win and a Denver loss to Kansas City, and they are in. They're also going to be playing in that 4:25 time slot on Sunday, so a little bit of scoreboard watching there for Miami fans and maybe Broncos fans, depending on how that game is going. So that wraps up the AFC playoff scenarios, who can still get in. Moving over to the NFC, the Detroit Lions, Minnesota Vikings, Green Bay Packers, Los Angeles Rams, and Washington Commanders have all clinched a spot in the playoffs. So have the Philadelphia Eagles, and they are locked in at the 2 seed. The 1 seed is still up for grabs in the NFC, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later here in the first half of the show. But as for right now, we're going to talk about who can grab that last playoff spot in the NFC. And it is between the Atlanta Falcons and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Falcons are 8-8 on the season. They are playing the Carolina Panthers on Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern, or noon here in the Central Time Zone. All they need is a win and a Tampa Bay loss, and they are in. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be playing the Saints on Sunday at noon Central Time. They are 9-7. All they need is a win or a tie, and they are in, or an Atlanta loss or tie to Carolina also gets them in. The winner, whoever of those 2 teams gets into the playoffs, they will be the winner of the NFC South, and that will get them in on winning their division. So that's kind of how the playoff scenarios break down, and what needs to happen for each of those teams who still have a chance to get in, and what they need to do. Obviously, they all need to win their games, and then some of them need a little bit more help than others. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Packers situation and how that might affect the Bears as they play the Packers. Interesting to see if the Packers are going to play their starters. They are locked into a playoff spot, as I said. Right now, they currently hold the 7 seed. Now, they could take over the 6 seed. They would need a Commanders loss to the Cowboys and a win over the Bears. Don't think they're going to have any problem taking care of the Bears, but already being in the 7 seed and needing help from the Commanders to move up, it'll be interesting to see if the Packers choose to rest their starters, as they have no chance to get that bye and the number 1 seed. The only people in the NFC who can win the number 1 seed are the other 2 teams in the NFC North, who will be playing each other on Sunday Night Football in Week 18. So not the Packers. The Lions and the Vikings are facing off on Sunday Night Football. I can't wait for that game personally. Very excited. I don't see the Vikings taking down the Lions personally. If I had to give my pick for that game, I think the Lions are but will probably narrowly beat the Vikings. But Sam Darnold really has been slinging it. It's hard to stop, Jefferson and Addison and Hawkinson. So many weapons on each side. So it'll be interesting to see who walks away with that game. Definitely a lot to play for, to get a rest in the first week of the playoffs. That definitely is a big prize for whoever can achieve that goal. So watching that game Sunday night will be interesting. Should be a great game, playoff atmosphere. So really excited to watch that one. But if you want to focus solely on the Bears and their position, the Bears will have one last chance to move up in their draft order. Currently sitting at 9 in the draft order. There's some talk on Twitter. King's Ivory X says the Bears could move up to the number 5 pick, so get inside that top 5, which would be obviously not nice for 3 years in a row, but it'd be nice for this team that has a lot of big holes to fill to get a top 5 talent there in the first round. So what would they need for that to happen? They would need the Las Vegas Raiders, the New York Jets, the Carolina Panthers, and the Jacksonville Jaguars all to win to move into the top 5. A very unlikely scenario there. Those teams are obviously in front of you in the draft order as it stands because they haven't won very much. Also something the Bears haven't done, but there's just a lot of teams this year. A lot of teams that have really struggled, and then a lot of teams that have really been good. I mean, there's a possibility they're talking about in the NFC of having a 14-win wildcard team. It will happen with the Minnesota Vikings at 14-2 and the Detroit Lions also at 14-2. One of those 2 teams is going to be the number 1 seed, and one of them is going to be the number 5 seed. So you have an away team in the first round of the playoffs with 14 wins, which is just truly crazy to think about. How much talent and how much the wins rather are all kind of stacked and grouped at the top. But when you look at something like Tankathon and you see how many teams there are with just an enormous amount of losses and even fewer wins, it does make a little bit more sense when you look into that. And you see the Bears have only 4 wins and they're sitting at the number 9 spot. I believe at some point within the past week, ESPN projected that they would be picking at 8, projected they would move up 1 spot from their current draft spot, but there is an opportunity, obviously, for them to move all the way up to the number 4 spot. So with that, with the playoffs covered, gonna take a break and remind you and ask you to please like, comment, and subscribe. I do read all the comments. I'm gonna make sure I interact with all of them. Please comment on things you like about the show, things you don't like about the show, things you want to see improved and changed. Any thoughts you have, if you disagree with me or if you agree with me, what maybe you thought I said right, what you thought I said wrong, anything like that. Please feel free to leave those comments. And if you have any questions or anything you want me to address, might be able to get that on the show if you leave a comment about that. So really do appreciate comments. Also really appreciate your time and your viewership. Please subscribe and leave a like. If you don't want to subscribe, at least leave a like. Really appreciate all the support I can get and appreciate you. All right, so moving on. Chicago Bears. They need to hire a new head coach. The coaching search is going to be complex, of course, but just to tie it in, to the first half of the show about playoffs. As I said, Lions, Vikings play to get a bye in the first round of the playoffs. Whichever team wins, the Bears would then be able to virtually interview a potential head coaching candidate from that team if they have a bye. So what does that look like in practice? So in practice, if the Lions win, which I'm picking the Lions. If the Lions win and the Bears want to interview Ben Johnson, they can do a virtual interview after Week 18 during the wild card week. They can do an interview with Ben Johnson virtually and do whatever that interview entails. But they'd be allowed to. But if the Vikings win, then the Bears would have an opportunity to interview Brian Flores if that's something they want to pursue. There's been a lot less talk about Brian Flores, but he has been a head coaching candidate in many other rounds of hiring before. Obviously, he has some lawsuits with the NFL. So there's questions I've heard from Bears Beats reporter if the McCaskies really want to get involved in a head coach candidate who is suing the league. And then there was also some concerns around beat reporters that the McCaskies would have to answer to other NFL owners who are part of this lawsuit as Flores is suing the league. So that is interesting, but just to understand availability to interview people, Brian Flores would be someone that the Bears might be interested in interviewing if the Vikings defeat the Lions on Sunday night and the Vikings end up having that first round bye in the playoffs. For whichever team doesn't win, you would just have to wait until after the wild card round in the playoffs to then host some of those virtual interviews. So you could get a 1 week jump for Brian Flores if the Vikings win, and then the next week you could start interviews with Ben Johnson, and so on. So it's only 1 week, but in hiring a head coach in the NFL, that is a very quick process sometimes. Sometimes you gotta make sure they don't get on the plane to the next city. So that 1 week could be very big and interesting. So that is an interesting note about availability to interview. Now, want to kind of circle back to the entire idea, or an idea I've heard thrown around a lot from some of these head coaching candidates, that they might want their own GM. They might want to bring in their own GM, and they might want to have Ryan Poles replaced with someone they feel more comfortable with. And certainly, I think any GM would not be comfortable with Ryan Poles having a 1 year contract as he currently does. As far as the general public knows, Ryan Poles only has 1 year left on his contract. And so I think the Bears, I've covered this in past episodes, but to to really hold this interview process, this head coaching search properly, really should either fire Ryan Poles and allow him to do something else, or allow him to seek other opportunities. I'm sure there's going to be some out there. He hasn't been a bad GM by any means, except in the win column, where people say it matters, but he's done some good things. So he probably will get an opportunity to maybe work his way back up, at least, or hold a high front office job. Or the other option is to extend Ryan Poles, which I agree with a lot of media and feeling around Chicago that he hasn't earned an extension with 2 10-game losing streaks on his record as the Bears GM. It's hard to justify extending him with that. But we've covered that in past episodes. So what I really want to talk about is that idea that a head coach goes into an interview, and some of these head coaches, like Ben Johnson or possibly Vrabel, will have a lot of leverage on the Chicago Bears. And any head coaching candidate. The Bears have obviously not performed well under Poles with those 2 10-game losing streaks. They obviously haven't hired coaches well. The new president of operations there with Kevin Warren hasn't changed anything. The Bears obviously still on a 10-game losing streak, still missing the playoffs. So any coach that heads in there is going to have a lot of questions. And one question that I have heading in there is, if a coach wants to bring in a new GM and Ryan Poles is leading the head coaching search, how is that possible? I don't understand how, if you go into a job interview and you're looking at the person interviewing you and you say, hey, I'm interested in this job. I want this job. I like the job. Let's assume the Bears get to that point with a head coach that has a lot of leverage, and they say, "But I want a new manager. I want a new boss in your place." And that boss is the one who's making the final, according to the Bears, right? That'd be Ryan Poles making the final hiring decision. So that would involve looking across the table at the person who would hire or not, or choose to hire or not hire you, and saying, yeah, I want someone else to do your job. And that's, it doesn't sound too outlandish. Like putting it in that perspective, it sounds crazy, like insane, cuckoo. But when you put it in the perspective of where the Bears are as an organization and the type of coaching candidate they want, it doesn't sound too crazy anymore. But my question is, if that does happen, that comes to fruition, what would that look like? How would that even come about? Like, are you emailing Kevin Warren, like with a private email, and be like, hey, so I want the job that you're offering, but I want to change the GM. How does that conversation happen in any sort of way that is appropriate? I don't even know the words to describe. It's such an awkward situation. I don't even know what words to describe. And if the Bears are willing to do that, I think it means one of two things, obviously. It means A, which I think is more likely, the Bears are lying about who's in charge of this head coaching search. Lying may be a strong term, but they said Ryan Poles is in charge of the head coaching search. And anyone who watched the interview or the press conference of Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren following the firing of Matt Eberflus, it certainly did not look like Ryan Poles was the man in charge. It didn't look like he was the one making the decision. When your president says, oh yeah, he's making the decision, it's just weird to say that the person making the decision, to me, this is probably a moot point that just bothers me personally more, but that this person who's supposed to be the leader of the team and making all the decisions doesn't step in and say, yes, I'm making the decisions. It is my call, right? That instead the president has to say, oh yeah, Ryan's still going to be in charge of hiring a head coach. Like I said, that's probably more of a personal issue, but it's just one more thing on top of that, on top of all the things in the press conference that looked so off about Ryan Poles being in charge, it's just one more thing. So I think what's most likely is the Bears said Ryan is in charge, and I mean, what else are you supposed to say? But he's probably not fully. Or, second of all, Ryan Poles is fired. Once again, I don't know if I'm not hoping that Ryan Poles gets fired because he's a bad person. He's probably a fine person. But it's just really hard to justify keeping Ryan Poles. If he had like 3 years left on his deal, then I'd be like, okay, that's fine. You can probably keep him here. If he does well, you tack on a 2-year extension, maybe to match up with the coach or whatever. But it's just the fact that he only has 1 year left on his contract that really makes me say and lean towards the fact that he should be fired. He just doesn't have enough on his resume to justify extending him, and especially when he has a head coach hire that was, by all intents and purposes, the worst head coach of the Bears, because he's the only head coach to get fired in the middle of the season. When that's your head coaching hire, and you kind of tied your bust to him, and you're like, I believe in him, and you brought him back, and he was your hire, but maybe he wasn't. So many weird things happening there. But it's just hard with the information that we have to say, yes, Ryan Poles should be back to be the GM of the Chicago Bears, make another head coaching hire, stay here for the remainder of Caleb's rookie contract, and make this team, everything that it should be. And the other thing that really bothers me personally about Ryan Poles, and maybe this doesn't bother other people, is I believe in his introductory press conference, he said, we're going to do it right, we're going to build through the trenches, and made it a point to say it in his opening statement that he is going to build through the trenches, something that Bears fans have been saying for years and they've been hoping for. And then 3 years into his regime, an absolutely awful offensive line, one of the lowest paid in the leagues, and it shows because Caleb Williams has been sacked more than any quarterback in the league. And the one thing that he emphasized that he was going to get right, and he was going to know as a former offensive lineman, is one of the worst in the leagues. After this is the compete year. This was a year where they were supposed to go out and they were gonna compete, and they were gonna be in the hunt late in the season and hopefully break into the playoffs and all this. And it turns out the offensive line still a massive liability, and that's one of the things that no one really is bringing up that bothers me. They're saying yes, the offensive line is bad. But I feel like there's a lot of forgetfulness that when he took the job, he said, yep, this is the one thing I'm going to get right, and I'm going to build through the trenches. And the trenches are the spots where the team's the worst on both sides of the ball. The offensive line, obviously, just highlighted, but defensive line too. The lack of pressure on opposing quarterbacks has been bad all year, and it still isn't getting much better, especially with Montez Sweat having a down year. So, with all that being said, the one last thing I want to say about the Ryan Poles situation with this, with Ryan Poles being in charge of the hiring of a head coach, is that he was supposed to have the final say. So, if you have final say and you sit there and the person across from you says, hey, I want you fired, but you have the final say, that candidate is not going to be hired, clearly, by the person. When you're doing the hiring, the person you're trying to hire says, hey, I want you fired, you're not going to get hired, right? So just the paradox of that very widely spread and very widely talked about narrative. I don't think I've heard any reporting, but it definitely has been widely talked about in the Bears media. So another thing that I think is really interesting, it was mentioned by Adam Schefter the other day that Vrabel's contract as not sure what it was, if he was an independent contractor, a consultant, I believe, is what he was for the Browns, I think. Anyway, it's not really important. What is important is that Schefter revealed the other day that his contract was up, which meant he was able to interview. And also there was a report that Pete Carroll was interested in the Bears job. He is not working in the NFL from what I could find. I didn't see any reports about him working in the NFL, even like as a consultant. So he is also able to be interviewed whenever the Bears would want to do that. And so is Vrabel. Now that his contract is up, you could, invite them into Halas Hall, fly them out to Chicago, have a full-blown interview with them. And it could have happened, that these things could have happened. And it is worth noting that this recording is a few days before it'll be posted. So if there's news on Thursday or Friday morning that doesn't sound or doesn't jive with this information I'm giving out, that's because this recording's happening a few days early. But the fact that Pete Carroll and Vrabel haven't been in for an interview, I think is interesting. I talked about how sometimes when you're hiring a head coach or a GM, you have to make sure they don't get on a plane to the next place. You have to make sure they don't leave. So if I was the Bears, I'd be interviewing these people, Pete Carroll, if he truly is interested, and Vrabel. He should be a head coaching candidate for the Chicago Bears. He's my second favorite on the list, right behind Ben Johnson. But they should be interviewing them right now, in my opinion. And the fact that they're not makes me wonder how safe Ryan Poles is. Because if you're going to fire your GM, you don't want to start a head coaching search with him in the building, right? You don't want him to head a head coaching search if he's going to be fired. So I don't think that's the case. I think the Bears are just doing kind of a traditional, we're going to wait until the end of the season. We are focusing on week 18 and winning this week and all the, the coach kind of talk that you would expect from a football team about why they're not doing, head coaching interviews yet. I don't expect Ryan Poles to be fired, but I think it's worth noting that there are interviews of, I think, very legitimate head coaching candidates the Bears could be having right now in person this week and trying to get a jump on the head coaching hire, and they're not. Don't know what that means, but it is noteworthy, I feel, and could be not good news for Ryan Poles. But just once again to clarify, I don't think that's what's happening. I just think that is worth noting, that these interviews have not been reported yet. They could have happened, and they could just not be leaked to the media. I doubt that's true, but it also is another possibility that the Bears really have been interviewing these people, and Ryan Poles has been leading those interviews and those meetings, and the media and the Bears community and fandom just doesn't know about it yet. That's also a possibility. So that's going to wrap up the Lindemann Show for today. I want to thank you for joining me. Once again, anything you disagree with, anything you like, anything you want different in the show, topics, ideas, segments, whatever you have, please feel free to drop those down in the comments. Really appreciate anyone liking. It's a great way to support the channel. Doesn't cost you anything. Really easy, really simple. Please subscribe. If you like the podcast or the show, please feel free to. It's not a podcast yet. Don't have it out on those platforms, but hopefully moving towards that sooner than later. But please pass it on to family members, friends, anyone you know who's a Bears fan who might be interested. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate everyone spending their time with me, and your viewership is greatly appreciated. And appreciate you becoming a part of the community and hanging out with me here, talking about your beloved Chicago Bears. Until next time, for the Lindemann Show, I'm Cody Lindemann, signing off.